You can go 24 hours without food, feel clean, feel disciplined, feel like you finally did the hard version, and quietly generate less cellular repair than a neighbor who ate lunch. Not because fasting is a myth, not because you did it wrong, because that fast is silently drawing down a chemical reserve inside your cells that most people past 50 have already spent. And when that reserve runs low, the repair process, the fast, is supposed to switch on runs at a fraction of what you think you are getting. In 2024, a research group spanning more than 20 universities, led by Sebastian Hofer and Frank Madeo at the University of Graz in Austria, published a paper in Nature Cell Biology with a title that should have ended the argument. Spermidine is essential for fasting-mediated autophagy and longevity. Not helpful, not supportive, essential. When they blocked the body's ability to make that one molecule, the fast still happened. The hunger, the low insulin, the empty stomach, all of it. The cellular cleanup largely did not. That molecule is a polyamine called spermidine. Your body makes its own. Your body also gets worse at making enough of it every decade, and the drop is measurable by your 40s. There is one ordinary food that carries more usable spermidine per serving than almost anything else you can buy in an American grocery store. It is a bean. Fermented, sitting in a refrigerated case for about $3, ignored by nearly everyone reading fasting content in this country. So here is what I am going to do. I am going to walk you through a full 24-hour fast, hour by hour, and show you the exact point where the machine runs out of parts. Then I will hand you the PODI protocol. 3 adjustments with real numbers that keeps the tank full so the fast you are already doing produces what the research says it should. This is not motivation. This is biology, and the mechanism is specific enough to check. Start with what autophagy actually is, because the fasting world uses the word constantly and defines it almost never. Inside every cell you own, there is a maintenance operation. Old proteins that folded wrong. Mitochondria that stopped producing energy cleanly and started leaking. Bits of cellular junk that pile up over years the way a warehouse accumulates broken pallets. Autophagy is the night crew that comes in after the shipping doors close, pulls that broken equipment off the floor, breaks it down to raw material, and hands the material back to be built into something that works. Yoshinori Osumi won the Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine in 2016 for mapping how that crew is dispatched at the molecular level. The standard fasting explanation stops there. Food stops, insulin falls, crew arrives, clean cells. Here is the part almost nobody in the mainstream explains. The crew does not run on quiet alone. When the loading dock goes silent, a signal has to travel from the outside of the cell to the machinery that actually builds the cleanup structures, and that signal runs through spermidine. Spermidine attaches a chemical tag to a protein called EIF5A. That tagged EIF5A then allows the cell to manufacture a specific master switch called TFEB, and TFEB is the thing that turns on the genes that build the cleanup machinery. No spermidine, no tag, no switch. The crew shows up to a locked equipment room. That is the invisible villain in this video. Not sugar, not carbs, not even insulin, which I have covered before. It is an empty spermidine pool at the exact hour your fast is demanding the most from it. And you cannot feel it. There is no symptom. You feel hungry, then you feel proud, and the biology underneath is running on fumes. Hour 0. Last bite. Your gut is absorbing, insulin is up, and the warehouse manager, a pathway called mTOR, has the full-day crew on the floor. Growth mode. Nothing gets cleaned during growth mode, and that is correct. You just delivered material. Building is the right call. Hour 4, absorption finishes, insulin starts falling. Your liver begins releasing stored sugar to hold blood glucose steady. mTOR is still active because the fuel is still flowing. No cleanup yet, and anyone who tells you autophagy starts when you skip breakfast is selling something. Hour 8. This is where most people wake up if they stopped eating around midnight, and this is where the self-congratulation usually begins. Biologically, almost nothing has happened yet. Your liver still holds sugar. Fat release has started, but it is idling. The cleaning crew has not been called. You are 8 hours into a 24-hour commitment, and the meter has barely moved, which is worth sitting with, because it tells you that the back half of this fast is carrying all of the weight. Hour 12. Liver sugar stores are running low. Your body flips to burning fat and starts producing ketones. Insulin hits its floor. mTOR finally powers down. And this is where something happens that the fasting community has almost entirely missed, even though it was measured directly in human volunteers in that GRAS study. Fasting does not simply permit autophagy. Fasting orders your cells to start manufacturing extra spermidine. The GRAS team found the same thing in yeast, in flies, in mice, and in people. The moment nutrients disappear, spermidine production surges. That surge is step 1. Everything else is downstream of it. Read that again slowly. The reason fasting works is partly that fasting makes spermidine, which means the fast is only as strong as your ability to make it. Hour 16. The crew's on the floor and moving. Autophagy markers in white blood cells are measurably up. Damaged mitochondria are being tagged and hauled off. In a 35-year-old with a full polyamine reserve, this is the beginning of the productive stretch, and it keeps climbing. Hour 20. In that same 35-year-old, output is still rising. In a 58-year-old, this is frequently where the curve flattens, and the reason is supply, not effort. Your cells have been burning through spermidine for 8 straight hours to keep the tagging process running. Tissue concentrations of spermidine decline with age in humans. That is not a supplement company talking point. It is documented across multiple tissue types, and one of the few known exceptions is healthy people in their 90s and past 100 who hold whole blood spermidine levels closer to a middle-aged person than to their own age group. Read that however you want. The researchers certainly did. Hour 24. Now you have 2 problems stacked. The first is the empty tank. The demand for spermidine has been running at maximum for 12 hours, and the resupply, which was never generous to begin with after 50, cannot keep pace. Tagging slows. TFEB production slows. The crew is still clocked in, but they are working with half the equipment. The second problem is cortisol. Extended fasting past roughly 18 to 20 hours raises cortisol, and cortisol tells your liver to manufacture glucose from amino acids. Those amino acids come from somewhere, and in a person over 50 carrying less muscle than they had at 40, some of them come out of tissue you spent years building. You are now paying a real price for hours that are delivering a shrinking return. Sit with what that combination means in practice. Somewhere in the last 4 or 5 hours of a 24-hour fast, a person over 50 can cross a line where the repair output per hour is falling while the muscle cost per hour is rising. The 2 lines cross. Nobody tells you where the crossing point is, because nobody in the popular conversation is measuring the variable that determines it. They are measuring the clock. The clock is the one thing in this entire system that tells you nothing about what is happening inside the cell. And there is a second lever on this same machinery that we have not touched yet, one that does not require a single additional hour of hunger. Inside your cells there is an enzyme called EP300 that acts as a brake on the cleanup crew. As long as EP300 is active, the crew stays parked. Spermidine releases that brake directly, not through insulin, not through mTOR, not through the clock. A separate handle on the same door. So the picture people carry in their heads, that 24 hours is simply twice as good as 12, is wrong in a specific and correctable way. The curve is not a straight line. It rises, it bends, and past a certain point, it can flatten while the cost keeps climbing. Where that bend sits depends almost entirely on how much spermidine you have to spend, which is why the honest version of the question is not how long should I fast, it is what am I fasting with? And that brings us to the bean, to a 20-year study of 829 people in an Italian mountain town, and to the reason the American nutrition conversation walks straight past one of the strongest human longevity signals ever recorded in a food. That is next. In 1995, researchers in a small town in the Italian Alps called Brun started tracking 829 people, ages 45 to 84, half men, half women. They sat down with each participant and recorded what they actually ate, then did it again every 5 years. And they followed those people for 20 years. They measured 146 separate nutrients, every vitamin, every mineral, every macronutrient the standard nutrition framework tracks. Then they asked a plain question: which of these 146 things lines up most strongly with staying alive? It was not fiber. It was not protein. It was not any vitamin on the side of a cereal box. It was spermidine. Of all 146 nutrients examined, dietary spermidine showed the strongest inverse relationship with death from any cause. The people in the top third of intake carried a mortality risk equivalent to being 5.7 years younger than the people in the bottom third. The results held after adjusting for smoking, exercise, body weight, blood pressure, diabetes, and the rest of the usual suspects. Then, a separate Austrian group in Salzburg ran the same analysis on a different population, the Saphir cohort, and got the same answer independently. That work was published by Stefan Kichel and colleagues, including Frank Madeo from Graz, in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition in 2018. 8 years ago. Peer-reviewed. Replicated. Now ask yourself when you last heard that number on a health podcast. Ask when a fasting influencer with 2 million followers last said the word polyamine out loud. Here is the part I want you to actually be angry about. And I want the anger pointed at the right target, because this is not a case of anyone hiding anything. It is a case of a system that has no slot to put this information in. Spermidine does not appear on a nutrition label. It is not on one. Not on any product sold in the United States. The USDA nutrient database, the thing every food tracking app in this country is built on top of, does not carry spermidine values for most foods. So a registered dietitian working from standard tools literally cannot see it. It is invisible to the entire measurement apparatus of American nutrition, which means it is invisible to the doctor reviewing your diet, invisible to the app on your phone, and invisible to the food company deciding what to put on the front of the box. Now add the incentives. Spermidine occurs naturally in cheap plants. There is nothing to patent in a soybean. Wheat germ is a milling byproduct that the industry spent decades stripping out of flour and selling as animal feed, because removing it makes bread last longer on a shelf. The refining process that gave America soft white bread is the same process that removed one of the densest sources of this compound from the national diet, and nobody made that decision maliciously. They made it for shelf life. Then look at the fasting content industry specifically. The business model there runs on rules about the clock because clock rules are simple, they are free to produce, and they generate endless argument in a comment section. 16 versus 18, 18 versus 24. 1 meal a day versus 2. Every one of those debates is about the same variable, and it is the wrong variable. The Graz work says the clock only matters to the extent that it produces a spermidine surge your cells can act on. Nobody rebuilt their content around that finding, because the honest version of the message is that a person over 50 eating the right foods on a 16-hour fast may be getting more real repair than a person over 50 white-knuckling 24 hours on an empty pool. That message sells nothing and ends a lot of arguments. There is one more layer to the incentive problem, and it is the one that actually costs people over 50 the most. Almost every fasting study that measured autophagy markers directly was run in lean, young, metabolically healthy volunteers, because those are the people who tolerate the protocol, show up for the blood draws, and produce clean data. So the numbers everyone quotes about what a 24-hour fast does were generated in bodies with full spermidine reserves. Then those numbers get repeated to a 58-year-old audience as if the biology transfers unchanged. It does not. The population being told to fast hardest is the population least equipped to convert that fasting into repair. And the gap between those two facts has never been addressed in a single piece of mainstream fasting content I have found. Let me be precise about how spermidine acts, because the mechanism is not vague. Inside your cells there is an enzyme called EP300. Guido Krumer's group, working with Madeo, showed that EP300 functions as a built-in repressor of the cleanup crew. It holds the brake on. Spermidine inhibits EP300 directly, and that work was published in Cell Death and Differentiation in 2014. Release the brake, and the crew starts moving, independent of insulin, independent of the clock, independent of how long it has been since you ate. So you now have two separate handles on the same door. Fasting drops mTOR, which is the warehouse manager standing down for the night. Spermidine releases EP300, which is the padlock on the equipment room. Pull one handle and you get partial access. Pull both and the crew works the full shift. The mainstream conversation has spent 15 years teaching people to yank harder and harder on the first handle, while the second one sat there untouched. Now, the bean. Fermented soybeans, sold as natto, carry somewhere between 11 and 20 milligrams of spermidine per 100 grams, depending on the batch and the fermentation. Whole dried soybeans run around 207 milligrams per kilogram, so roughly 20 milligrams in 100 grams of dry beans. The fermentation matters, because the bacteria that make natto produce additional polyamines during the process, rather than consuming them. That is why a fermented soybean beats an unfermented one, and it is why the Japanese diet, which centers this food, keeps showing up in longevity data that researchers usually attribute to fish or green tea. Wheat germ is the other heavyweight, at roughly 24 to 35 milligrams per 100 grams, which comes out to about 2 to 2.5 milligrams in a single tablespoon. Shiitake and king trumpet mushrooms land around 10 to 16 milligrams per 100 grams. Green peas, lentils, and chickpeas cluster in the range of 4 to 11 milligrams per 100 grams cooked. Aged cheddar carries a little under 3 milligrams per 100 grams. Those are not exotic foods. Every single one of them is in a normal American supermarket, and natto is in the freezer or refrigerated case of any Asian market for the price of a coffee. I want to be straight with you about where I came into this, and I will keep it short because this is not a testimonial channel. About 2 years ago, I ran a full 24-hour fast once a week for 6 straight months. Sunday evening to Monday evening. I did not miss one. And when I ran my markers at the end of it, the movement was real, but small enough that I assumed I had hit whatever ceiling a 50-something metabolism allows. I filed it under diminishing returns and moved on. It was not until the Graz paper came out in 2024 that I understood I had not hit a ceiling. I had been running a process that needed a raw material I was not supplying, in a body that had stopped making enough of it on its own. I was doing the hard part perfectly and skipping the cheap part entirely. That is the frustrating shape of this whole subject. The expensive input, hunger, I had covered. The $3 input, I did not know existed. Now, intellectual honesty, because I am not interested in overselling this. The Brun data is observational. It shows association, not proof of cause. People eating a lot of legumes, mushrooms, and whole grains are probably doing other sensible things, and the researchers adjusted for what they could, but adjustment is never perfect. The mechanism work on spermidine and autophagy is strong, but a large share of it comes from yeast, worms, flies, mice, and human cells in a dish rather than from living people. The human trials that do exist are small. A randomized trial by Wirth and colleagues published in Cortex in 2018 tested spermidine on memory in older adults at risk for dementia and found a modest signal. A later, larger trial in older adults with subjective cognitive decline was more mixed. Anyone telling you this is settled is ahead of the evidence. What is not in dispute is narrower and still useful. Spermidine levels in human tissue fall with age. Fasting raises spermidine production, and blocking that rise blunts the benefit of the fast. Dietary spermidine tracked with lower mortality in 2 independent European cohorts more strongly than any of the other 145 nutrients measured. And the foods that carry it are cheap, common, and safe at food doses. For anyone over 50 running extended fasts, that is enough to change what you put on the plate before the fast starts, which is exactly what the POD protocol does. 3 components, specific numbers, and one common mistake that cancels all 3. That is next. The protocol is called POD. 3 letters, 3 components, named after the thing the beans come in. Each one has a number attached, And there is one mistake at the end that cancels all three if you make it, so stay with me through the whole thing. P stands for prime the pool. The target is 12 milligrams of dietary spermidine per day. That number comes straight out of Brun. The top third of intake in that cohort, the group carrying a mortality risk equivalent to being 5.7 years younger, was eating above 79.8 micromoles of spermidine daily. Converted into the unit you can actually work with, that is a little under 12 milligrams. So 12 is the floor, not the ceiling. Here is what 12 milligrams looks like on a plate, and I want you to notice how ordinary it is. 100 grams of natto, which is one standard package, gets you somewhere between 11 and 20 milligrams by itself. That single item clears the target. If natto is not going to happen in your kitchen, and for a lot of Americans it is not, then build it out of pieces. 2 tablespoons of wheat germ gives you roughly 4 to 5 milligrams. 100 grams of cooked shiitake or king trumpet mushrooms adds 10 to 16. 150 grams of cooked lentils or chickpeas adds around 6 to 8. 30 grams of aged cheddar adds a little under 1. Green peas, sunflower seeds, sesame seeds, broccoli and cauliflower all contribute in smaller amounts. 2 tablespoons of wheat germ stirred into something, plus a serving of mushrooms at dinner, plus a cup of lentils, and you are past 12 without buying a single supplement or eating anything strange. A practical note on preparation, because this one is easy to get wrong. Spermidine dissolves in water. If you boil lentils or peas hard and pour the water down the drain, a meaningful share of the compound goes with it. Cook legumes in the liquid you plan to eat, as a soup or a stew, or steam rather than boil. Wheat germ should be refrigerated and eaten raw, stirred into yogurt or oatmeal after cooking, not baked into something at 350 degrees. O stands for overlap the windows. Place your largest spermidine load in the final 90 minutes of your eating window, and hold the fast at 16 to 18 hours rather than pushing to 24. Both halves of that matter, and the logic follows directly from what we walked through. The 90-minute placement is about supply arriving before demand. Your cells begin drawing down the spermidine pool the moment the fast tips into the repair phase, roughly hour 12 onward. Loading the pool at breakfast, 12 hours before that draw begins, means you have already cleared and distributed much of it. Loading it in the last stretch of your eating window means the material is present and circulating when the cascade actually calls for it. Same food, same day, different biological timing. The second half is the part that will feel wrong to anyone who has built an identity around the long fast. Stop chasing 24 hours. For most adults past 50, a 16 to 18 hour fast run 5 or 6 days a week, with the pool kept full, produces more total repair across the week than one heroic 24-hour fast on an empty pool. You are trading a single deep spike that stalls out from lack of material for repeated full-strength cycles. Frequency with supply beats duration without it, and you avoid the cortisol tax. Past roughly 18 to 20 hours, cortisol climbs and starts pulling amino acids out of tissue to manufacture glucose. In someone over 50 who is already fighting a slow loss of muscle every year, that is a real cost, and it buys you hours of repair that were flattening anyway. There is a version of this I hear constantly, and it is worth answering directly. Someone says they feel better on the 24-hour fast, sharper, more in control, so the longer fast must be doing more. What you are feeling at hour 22 is largely ketones and elevated adrenaline. That sensation is real, and it is not a readout of autophagy. Your cells do not send you a status update. The feeling of a hard fast and the output of a hard fast are two separate things, and confusing them is how people end up optimizing for the sensation instead of the biology. D stands for daily, without gaps, for at least 6 weeks. This is the component people skip, and it is the one the biology cares about most. Tissue polyamine levels do not respond to a single meal. They respond to sustained intake over weeks. One package of natto on a Tuesday does not refill a pool that has been draining since your early 40s. The Brun participants were not doing a protocol. They were eating that way for 20 years. So the standard is 7 days a week, hitting 12 milligrams or better for 6 weeks minimum before you evaluate anything. Weekend gaps are the specific failure pattern. 5 days on and 2 days off is not 80% of the benefit here, because you are refilling a reservoir that drains continuously. 2 empty days out of 7 means the pool never reaches a level where the fasting cascade has surplus to work with. Now, the mistake. This is the one that takes people who did all 3 components correctly and gives them nothing. Do not put your spermidine load in the same sitting as a large, fast-digesting protein bolus. This is the classic version of the error. Someone hears wheat germ, and they stir 2 tablespoons into a whey protein shake. Or they break their fast with the lentil soup and 35 grams of whey at the same time. It feels efficient. It is self-defeating. And the reason is the mechanism we covered in the second half. Whey protein is loaded with leucine, and leucine is among the most powerful known activators of mTOR. mTOR is the warehouse manager. When mTOR is switched on hard, it sends the cleaning crew home and calls in the build crew. You have just delivered the raw material that unlocks the equipment room in the same breath as the signal that clears the floor. The spermidine is still absorbed. The repair signal it was supposed to support is gone. The fix costs nothing. Separate them by at least 90 minutes. If your eating window opens at noon and closes at 8, put the protein-heavy meal at the front of the window and the spermidine-heavy meal at the back. That satisfies the O component and dodges this mistake in the same move. The protein still does its job. Muscle protein synthesis past 50 genuinely requires that mTOR signal, and I am not telling you to avoid it. I am telling you not to fire it at the same moment you are trying to load the opposite pathway. Before the close, 3 things that require a doctor and not a video. Natto is extremely concentrated in vitamin K2. If you take warfarin or any vitamin K antagonist, natto can interfere with your medication in a way that matters clinically. Talk to whoever manages your anticoagulation before you touch it. This is not a general caution, it is specific and it is real. Soy products can interfere with the absorption of levothyroxine and other thyroid medication. If you are on thyroid replacement, spacing matters, and your prescriber should be the one telling you how much. And if you are on any glucose-lowering medication, insulin, sulfonylureas, or otherwise, extended fasting of any length changes your blood sugar behavior in ways those drugs can amplify. That conversation happens with your physician before you change your fasting window, not after. Wheat germ contains gluten, so it is off the table for celiac disease. Mushrooms, lentils, chickpeas, peas, and seeds cover the same ground without it. Here is what I want you to take out of this. The fasting conversation in this country has spent 15 years arguing about a clock, and the clock was never the limiting factor for people our age. Your body was doing the hard part. It was running out of one cheap material at the exact hour it needed it most, silently, with no symptom you could feel, and nobody told you because the compound does not appear on a label, cannot be patented, and does not generate an argument in a comment section. You do not have to fast longer. You have to fast supplied. If you are starting the POD protocol this week, comment the word POD below so I can see who is actually moving on this. I read them. Next week I am going into the second half of this problem, which is what happens to the material your cells break down after the cleanup crew finishes. Because clearing the debris and clearing it out of the body are 2 different processes. And the second one has its own bottleneck that gets worse after 50. That video is the layer underneath this one. And subscribe. It is the single thing that helps this channel keep growing, and growth is what lets me keep putting a week of reading into one video instead of chasing whatever is trending. Mechanisms, not motivation. 1 video a week.